Eric, after 15 years, we're eliminating your position, Daniel said flatly, not even pretending to be sorry. Clean out your desk by end of day. My name is Eric Dawson. I'm 53 years old, and until that Monday morning, I was the senior systems analyst at Stratwell Technologies, a mid-sized tech firm based in Charlotte, North Carolina. For a decade and a half, I'd been the silent backbone of the IT department, bridging the gap from dial-up modems to cloud integration. 3 CEOs had come and gone. Hundreds of faces had passed through the office halls. I stayed. I trained every new hire. I rescued every corrupted file. I worked weekends, holidays, during storms and blackouts, without ever asking for a promotion or a pat on the back. When Daniel summoned me to his office, with Vanessa from HR already sitting stiffly by his side, I knew before he even opened his mouth, the air had changed weeks ago. I simply nodded once. I understand. No arguments, no shouting, no bargaining. I walked out with my spine straight and my face blank. At my desk, younger employees, some of whom I'd personally mentored, glanced sideways at me, pretending to work as whispers shot like sparks across the floor. News travels fast in places like this. Most of them were decent kids, but they had no idea how the systems they used daily actually functioned, or how fragile they really were. I packed methodically. A photo of my family, a battered coffee mug my daughter painted for me in 5th grade, a stubborn cactus that had somehow survived 15 years of fluorescent lights. Bethany from marketing stopped by, face twisted with concern. "Eric, I just heard. This is insane. You practically built this place." I shrugged. "Companies change direction?" Her voice tightened. "But without any warning? After everything you've done?" "It's fine," I said quietly, not because it was, but because there was nothing else to say. As I gathered my things, I caught Daniel stepping out of his office, arms crossed, watching me leave. No handshake, no thanks, just surveillance. They thought I was walking away empty-handed. They thought I was just another outdated relic, discarded without consequence. But what they didn't know, what they never cared enough to realize, was that I'd quietly become the most critical person in the entire building. And soon enough, they would understand exactly what that meant. I joined Stratwell Technologies back when it was just 2 floors and a shared business complex off East Moorhead Street in Charlotte. Olivia, my daughter, was barely starting 1st grade. Now she was in grad school. Time didn't just move forward, it accelerated. The company grew and I grew with it. From physical servers crammed into a supply closet to enterprise cloud solutions with remote access and layered security, I was there for every phase. Not because I chased promotions, but because I cared about building something solid. I've turned down 3 offers from larger firms over the years. Better pay, fancier titles, but less integrity. Loyalty still meant something to me. Andrea, my wife, used to joke that the servers were my second family. She wasn't wrong. I could tell you which rack hummed louder during the summer months, and which unit had a faulty fan I could hear from my office. I stayed late more often than I should have, missed a few birthday dinners, showed up to parent-teacher conferences with tired eyes and a wrinkled shirt, but I provided, quietly, consistently. The infrastructure I built at Stratwell survived 3 acquisitions and a dozen technology pivots. There were months we were ordered to migrate systems under impossible timelines with no added budget, and I still made it happen. I didn't complain, that wasn't my way. I wasn't flashy, I didn't dominate meetings or chase credit. But the people who paid attention, legal, compliance, a few good execs, knew that 5 years ago Daniel arrived. Fresh MBA, expensive suits, always referring to us as IT resources, never as people. He brought with him a wave of jargon, digital transformation, agile pivoting, future shriefing. I tried to bring him up to speed on the systems, how layers had been stacked over the years, patch on patch, like duct tape on a single question that showed he understood what was under the hood. He needed simplify and streamline, he kept saying. Too much legacy infrastructure. I warned him that those legacy tools were keeping the company afloat, and that ripping them out without a deep migration plan would be like pulling the foundation from under a house while people were still living in it. 6 months ago, he brought in a consultant, Jason Phillips. Flashy smile, LinkedIn decorated with Stanford credentials, expensive watch that always peeked out from his blazer sleeve. He never introduced himself to the IT team, just hovered near Daniel, talking in low tones, glancing over at my department like we were the outdated machines that needed replacing. I noticed it all, Their meetings, their silences when I walked past, a changing tone in status updates. Then, little by little, access permissions on my admin accounts began to shift. Nothing drastic, just a few limitations, logging restrictions, sandboxed environments. Things no one should have changed without speaking to me first. I didn't complain, I documented. That was always my strength, quiet observation, accurate logging. I'd built the security audit system myself after a data breach 6 years earlier at the request of the company's legal team. They'd praised its robustness, called it future-proof. Ironic. 3 months ago, I stopped getting invites to planning meetings. Project decisions happened without me. My name was no longer CC'd on emails I used to review by default. Junior employees, people I'd trained from scratch, started heading projects I used to lead. And then, one day, while running a routine diagnostic on a side server no one else ever bothered with, I noticed a set of recurring outbound financial entries. It wasn't what I was looking for, but it's what I found. I didn't alert anyone, not yet, because I knew exactly how this would unfold, not with confrontation, not with shouting matches, but with patience and precision, and the knowledge that while they saw an old IT guy losing relevance, I was already 3 steps ahead. And what I had just stumbled onto was far bigger than they could imagine. The changes had started subtly, too subtle for anyone else to notice. At first, it was just a few missed emails. Project updates I normally received were rerouted or accidentally left off threads. Then came the meetings, strategy sessions, tech evaluations, security audits. Suddenly happened without my name on the invite list. I would hear about them in passing, or after decisions had already been made. When I asked, Daniel would brush it off. Streamlining communications, he said once. Nothing personal, Eric. But I knew. You don't exclude the guy who designed half the systems, unless you're deliberately trying to isolate him. My access logs began to change, slowly. Permissions I'd held for years were reduced, permitted from key admin functions, stripped from archive backups, sidelined from secure areas. No official notice, no documentation. Just quiet, incremental control shifts. The kind of digital manipulation that only someone with deep back-end access could execute. I could have raised it to legal or compliance, but that would have tipped my hand. So I let it happen. I watched, I took notes, and I waited. Andrea noticed first. One night I sat on our porch with a beer in hand, watching the sun dip behind the pine trees that lined our backyard. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "Work stuff?" I nodded, not looking up. "Just changes? Anything you can't handle?" "Not yet." But deep down I felt it shifting, the way a veteran sailor feels a storm in his bones before the first cloud forms. This wasn't like the last few reorganizations. This wasn't removal by attrition. They weren't reassigning me, they were erasing me. And then came the memo. It wasn't sent to me, I found it while running an automated crawl through shared network folders, a tool I'd built years ago to flag unprotected data. It was a PowerPoint deck titled IT Modernization Plan, Confidential, prepared by Jason Phillips. Slides were slick, full of buzzwords: scalable integration, vendor-agnostic migration, cost-optimized workforce. What it didn't have was me. My name, my role, my department. Nowhere on the proposed org chart. At the top, Jason Phillips, listed as Interim Director of Technology Transformation. That was when I knew. My job wasn't evolving, it was being eliminated. And it wasn't personal, it was calculated. That same afternoon, while performing a routine check on our aging finance server, a system no one touched anymore except me, I noticed a strange outbound transaction, a $3,200 0 payment to Apex Solutions Group. I'd never heard of it. Curious, I searched our vendor records. Nothing. I dug deeper. Apex was registered just last year to a UPS mailbox in Wilmington. No website, no phone number. The pattern became clearer. Monthly payments gradually increasing, starting small, then growing bold. I didn't confront Daniel, or Jason, or Vanessa from HR. I downloaded the full record, history, copied the logs, and archived everything to an encrypted flash drive I kept in a private fire safe at home. The system was speaking. It was telling a story no one else was listening to. But I was. Because sometimes the man in the corner, the one they stop seeing after a while, is the only one who knows where all the wires run. and I had just started tugging at a wire that could bring the whole place down. The morning after I was let go, I woke up without an alarm for the first time in 15 years. The house was quiet, the neighborhood already humming with early commutes. I sat in my home office, staring at my personal laptop. I wasn't angry, not the way people expect. I felt cold, focused, like something had snapped into place. Andrea brought me coffee without saying a word and kissed my shoulder before heading out to the grocery store. After 19 years of marriage, she could read the temperature of my silence. When the door closed behind her, I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and retrieved a flash drive, one of several I'd built over the years. Stratwell's data retention policy forbade removing company data, but long ago, during an internal audit scandal, I'd designed an off-site security protocol for executive compliance. They'd signed off on the backups back then, and promptly forgotten, but I hadn't. I plugged it in and began to scan the archive. Log files, system snapshots, internal emails, layer after layer of buried access trails. It was all there. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for until I found it. Over the last 18 months, nearly $1,800,000, 0 cents, had been quietly funneled to Apex Solutions Group, a shell company. On paper, it was listed as an enterprise software consultant, but the address was nothing more than a rented mailbox at a shipping store in Wilmington. I double-checked the payment approvals. They lined up perfectly with license renewals for software I knew inside and out. The amounts were off by 15 to 20%. Not enough to trigger red flags in procurement, just enough to build a slush fund in plain sight. I pulled the Apex registration, the listed owner, Thomas Radner. Never heard of him. But then, after cross-referencing his name with social media records, the puzzle clicked. He was the brother-in-law of Brian Wilcox, our CFO. A man who'd signed off on every Apex payment without review. I sat back, hands folded behind my head. It wasn't just fraud, it was family laundering. But it didn't stop there. I went back further, combing archived email strings, approval logs, and budget reallocation memos. Jason Phillips's name kept appearing, not as a consultant, but as a procurement advisor, quietly positioned within a restructuring work group, direct reporting to Brian. A role I didn't even know existed until now. He wasn't just there to modernize IT. He was the hatchet man, the inside contractor brought in to sever the last internal resistance. Me. This wasn't just personal, it was tactical. The more I dug, the more everything lined up. I pulled older records, seemingly unrelated consulting expenses filed under vendor optimization. Lakeside Business Solutions. $600,000, 0 cents over 2 fiscal years. I hadn't seen the name before, but the registered owner, Patricia Wilcox. Brian's wife, no website, no staff, just another virtual mailbox. The entire upper tier of Stratwell's financial management was a web of shell entities, inflated billing and friendly approval. They weren't stealing money by falsifying expenses. They were inflating real ones, overpaying for legitimate services, then siphoning the difference. It was smart, elegant even, and almost invisible to surface-level audits. I could have emailed the board right then, dropped it all in a single bombshell, but I paused, finger hovering over the send button. Too easy to dismiss, too easy to label a bitter ex-employee with an axe to grind. No, I needed a clean shot. I needed strategy. I encrypted the most critical files and placed backups in 3 separate cloud locations under aliases. Then I built a timeline, payments, approvals, signatures, correspondence. Every piece was precise, undeniable. By noon, I had something more than just evidence. I had leverage. That afternoon, Stephen, a junior systems analyst I'd mentored for 2 years, messaged me. "Eric, just heard about yesterday. They moved Phillips into your office. I'm so sorry. Total BS." I didn't reply right away. When I did, it was just 4 words. Keep your eyes open. And that night, after Andrea went to bed, I sat under the pale desk light and prepared my first move. I wasn't going to knock on the front door. I was going to crawl through the wiring behind the walls. They thought firing me erased the threat. They had no idea I'd already hardwired myself into the system. Wednesday was approaching like a loaded chamber, and I wasn't about to waste the shot. I'd spent the previous 24 hours reviewing everything I had, cross-reference transaction logs, vendor registrations, IP access histories, and archive staff permissions. Every thread pointed to the same knot. Epic Solutions was a fraud, and Brian Wilcox had his fingerprints all over the design. But the elegance of the scheme came from how legitimate it looked on the surface. For actual services, payments made on time, approval chains rubber-stamped through standard channels. It was a masterclass in laundering theft through bureaucracy, and they thought I was too blind or too obsolete to catch it. What they hadn't accounted for was that I had built the very systems they were now abusing. I knew the cracks they'd try to hide in because I'd sealed those cracks myself for a decade and a half. So I began drawing the outline, not just of the fraud itself, but of their weakest pressure points. I needed to strike in a way that made denial impossible. That meant hitting them with something they couldn't explain away, couldn't bury in a boardroom email or wave off with legal threats. I needed to take the problem out of their hands and put it in front of people who wouldn't hesitate to act, people with authority above Daniel and Brian. The board. I began by preparing 3 packages. The first was a surface-level summary, clean, brief, focused on facts, no emotion. The second was a deep-dive report, complete with financial analysis, authorization records, approval anomalies, and pattern graphs. And the third was the nuke, internal emails, redacted correspondence, and vendor documentation, showing that Apex was linked directly to Brian Wilcox's brother-in-law, and indirectly to his wife's shell company, too. It took hours to format, timestamp, and encrypt the files. I double-checked every number, every email header, every metadata tag. One mistake and they'd have a crack to discredit it all. I uploaded the packages to 3 different secure storage services, each under an anonymous profile routed through VPNs. One was mirrored in a dead man's switch scheduled to release in the event of inactivity on my end. If anything happened to me, the entire file set would be automatically emailed to the SEC, the IRS, and 3 tech journalists I'd vetted for objectivity. That was my insurance. Then came the staging. I activated an old system test account that I'd once created during a penetration audit, an unmonitored internal email address that mimicked the Stratwell domain but was technically routed through an external proxy. The kind of thing no one had noticed in years. The perfect launch pad. At exactly 9:15 a.m. Thursday, the same day as the quarterly board meeting, I'd send the first volley. A short email to Daniel, subject line, Fang Feng era, chairing attention required. The body would include a high-level breakdown of the Apex transactions and a polite request for immediate review. I wouldn't mention Brian, wouldn't mention the shell company connections. Not yet. Just enough to be credible. Just enough to create panic. If Daniel was complicit, he'd immediately try to contain it. If he wasn't, he'd go straight to Brian. Either way, I'd be watching, monitoring the bounce, listening for the scramble. That afternoon, I visited my bank and accessed my safe deposit box. Inside was a second drive, older, but with documentation of original security protocols and who had accessed what systems over the last 20 months. According to those logs, Brian had requested and received elevated access permissions to the financial review dashboard exactly 17 months ago, the same day the first Apex payment was processed. It was almost too perfect. At dinner, Andrea looked across the table. "You've barely said a word all day," she said. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, "just tying up loose ends." She stared at me a moment longer, then nodded. She knew better than to push when I was this still. That kind of stillness wasn't defeat, it was concentration. After she went to bed, I sat alone in the dim light of my office, watching the final countdown tick down on the scheduled email. By morning, I wouldn't need to fight for attention. They'd be the ones scrambling to shut down the alarm I was about to sound. At exactly 9:15 a.m., the email left my proxy account and slipped silently into Stratwell's internal system. It looked clean, like any internal communication from a mid-tier compliance analyst. Subject line, financial irregard, IDINT, action required. The body was brief, professionally worded, and laced with enough precise data points, transaction dates, vendor ID, payment amount, and didn't accuse, it didn't threaten, it simply said, attached are recent transactional records linked to a vendor not listed in our public supplier registry. Due to usual growth in monthly disbursements, I recommend this be reviewed immediately by finance and legal. I watched the delivery confirmation blink green on my screen. Then, I waited. 15 minutes later, Daniel called. I didn't pick up. His voicemail was short, tense. "Eric, we need to talk, right away." "Call me back." I didn't. I drove to a small coffee shop 2 blocks from Stratwell's headquarters and set up in the back corner with my laptop. I logged into one of my cloud mirrors and monitored system traffic. By 10:30, I had confirmation. Internal server activity showed a flurry of email forwards, Daniel to Brian, Brian to legal, then to HR. Then, silence. The calm before the executive storm. At 11:12, another email pinged my backup inbox, this one from Vanessa in HR. Mr. Dawson, we have received troubling communication from an unknown source that appears to reference confidential company matters. Please be reminded that your separation agreement includes confidentiality obligations. Any future violations may result in legal action. I laughed. There it was, the intimidation playbook, the same HR boilerplate used to spook junior employees into silence. One problem, I had never signed a separation agreement. They'd rushed me out so fast on Monday that no paperwork had ever crossed my desk. I took a screenshot of her message, time-stamped it, then filed it in my archive under expected moves. Around noon, I drove to a local print and mail shop where I had a second backup stored offline, just in case. I wasn't paranoid, I was methodical. Back home, my phone showed 3 more missed calls. Daniel, Vanessa again, and now Jason Phillips. Interesting. He hadn't made a move until now. His voicemail was pure corporate polish. Eric, I understand there may have been some confusion or miscommunication. I'd appreciate the opportunity to clarify a few things in person. We respect everything you've contributed to Stratwell and would like to avoid any unnecessary escalation. Translation, we're scared. Jason showing up this early in the game meant the pressure inside was rising fast. I checked my private email, one new message. From Steven, what the hell is going on? Phillips called an emergency meeting. Everyone's locked down. Nobody's allowed to access legacy archives, even stuff we need to do our jobs. They're pulling admin privileges left and right. I replied simply, don't get involved, just keep watching. That afternoon, I received a call on my home landline, a number no one had used for business in over a decade. I picked up but said nothing. This is Brian Wilcox, came the voice, calm and practiced. I think we've had a misunderstanding, do we? If you have concerns about company transactions, there are channels. The board doesn't need to be pulled into operations. I let the pause stretch. Brian, I said slowly, I think they'd be very interested in Apex Solutions. And in your brother-in-law. The silence on the other end was instant and sharp. You're making a serious mistake, he said finally. We can fix this. A more generous severance. A consulting role, whatever you need. No, Brian, I said. What I need is already in motion. I hung up. 10 minutes later, Vanessa emailed again, this time attaching a revised severance agreement. The number was double the original. In bold text, by signing you agree to maintain full confidentiality regarding all company matters past and present. They still thought this was about money. They thought I was bluffing, angling for a payout. But they hadn't seen what I had lined up for Friday morning. They weren't just losing control. They were about to lose everything they'd built on a lie. Friday morning arrived with the kind of silence that only comes before everything changes. I sat on my porch with a coffee in one hand and my laptop balanced on the other. At exactly 8:00 AE, the email I had scheduled 3 days ago deployed itself to every member of Stratwell Technologies board. Subject line, Quarterly Financial Review, depending. The 27-page PDF attachment was clinical, surgical, transaction logs, invoice trails, vendor registrations, all leading directly to Apex Solutions and Thomas Radner, Brian Wilcox's brother-in-law. That alone might have triggered suspicion. But then came the deeper cut. Lakeside Business Solutions, another shell entity owned by Patricia Wilcox. Layer by layer, the report unraveled a 3-year scheme built on inflated vendor payments, inside access approvals, and unauthorized system privileges, all digitally documented, time-stamped, and laid bare for the board to choke on. The final slide was simple. 3 names, Brian Wilcox, Patricia Wilcox, Jason Phillip, followed by one word, complicity. By 8:17, my phone began to vibrate nonstop, with calls from office extensions, legal assistants, numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all. I had no intention of speaking until the right people had read everything. I drove 20 miles out of Charlotte to a quiet roadside diner, took a seat in the back, and waited. At 9:00 a.m., the board's Emergency Finance Committee meeting convened. Robert Chen, the one board member who still knew how to read an audit trail, was inside with a full hard copy of my report. By 9:32, a text from Stephen hit my phone. Police are here. Wilcox and Daniel being pulled into separate rooms. Phillips looks white as a ghost. What did you do? I stared at the message for a second before locking my screen. What I did wasn't magic. It was math and memory. At 10:00, Stratwell's general counsel called. This one I answered. Mr. Dawson, she said, careful and cold at first. The board is taking your report very seriously. Several executives have been placed on immediate leave pending investigation. I sipped my coffee. Good. We'd appreciate your cooperation moving forward. I cut in. Everything is already backed up and secured. If anything happens to me or my family, copies go to the SEC, IRS, and 3 journalists. I'm not interested in discussions. I'm interested in accountability. Her voice softened, but it didn't matter. That afternoon, I logged into LinkedIn, not to apply for jobs, but to post one sentence. Never burn bridges. Let them collapse under the weight of their own corruption. The post went viral inside the hour. My inbox flooded, recruiters, ex-colleagues, industry analysts. I didn't respond to a single one. That night, I sat across from Andrea and told her everything. The silence between us wasn't heavy. It was, "Do you want to do now?" she asked. I didn't answer right away, because the part of me that had wanted revenge now felt quiet, satisfied. At 11:47 p.m., my phone buzzed again. It was Robert Chen. The board had voted. Brian was out, Daniel was suspended, Jason Phillips had been removed completely. But that wasn't the part that caught me off guard. Eric, Robert said, we want to bring you back, not to your old job. We're creating a new executive position, Chief Information Security Officer. You'd report directly to the board. I said nothing, because this wasn't just about being asked to return. It was about returning on my own terms, with the power to protect the systems they once thought I couldn't understand, and to rebuild them the right way. For the first time in 15 years, I wasn't going back to follow orders. I was going back to make sure no one ever weaponized the system again. 6 months later, I sat in the corner office of Stratwell's new executive wing. The title on the door read Chief Information Security Officer, but the name beneath it mattered more, Eric Dawson. I didn't go back to reclaim anything. I went back to restructure it all. The first 90 days were chaos. Damage control, system audits, internal interviews, third-party forensic accounting. Brian Wilcox had pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud and wire manipulation in exchange for cooperation. Daniel claimed ignorance, but his email trails told another story. Jason Phillips had fled the country, last seen boarding a flight to Brazil. The DOJ was already working with international authorities to bring him back. The company had recovered close to $4,700,000, 0 cents. But the reputation damage would take longer to heal. That's where I came in. My role wasn't about punishment. I rebuilt the internal controls from scratch, restructured vendor screening, and placed audit visibility tools where no one could override them. And I didn't do it alone. Stephen, the junior analyst who once watched from the sidelines, was now leading daily operations under my guidance. The kid had talent. He just needed to see how much one quiet person could change the direction of an entire institution. Some days were harder than others. I walked the same halls where I'd once been silently discarded. I passed people who still looked away, unsure whether to admire or fear what I'd done. But I didn't need their applause. I had peace. I'd done it cleanly. Without lawsuits, without headlines, just precision. One Friday afternoon, Andrea stopped by the office. I walked her through the glass atrium where we now held monthly cybersecurity briefings. As we stepped into the elevator, she smiled and asked, "You happy?" I thought for a moment. The fire that had once fueled the entire retaliation had cooled into something steadier. Not joy, not vindication, just clarity. "I'm good," I said. That weekend we took a drive into the Blue Ridge Mountains. No phone, no emails, just winding roads, crisp air, and quiet space. For the first time in years, I wasn't scanning for cracks in the system. I was watching leaves fall. I was breathing. On Monday morning, a notification pinged quietly across my desk. Budget for the next quarter's security initiative had been approved. Unanimous vote, no revisions, no questions. I smiled slightly and slid the screen aside. Andrea had told me once, never seek revenge, just make yourself undeniable. And that's what I had done, not by shouting, not by threatening, but by letting the truth do its job. As I stood by the window, overlooking the skyline of Charlotte, I thought back to the man they tried to erase, the one who walked out without a word, discarded like outdated hardware. That man was gone. What stood here now was a rebuilt system, a fireball they would never bypass again. And this time I was the one holding the admin keys.